If you ever feel like you might need.
For this week's Women in Business series, I'm excited to introduce you to Jane Murray. Jane is an incredible woman who has accomplished so much in her life. She is a lawyer. She has been an investor in a VC firm, and she now dedicates herself to her startup called Peace Beam that helps bring mindfulness and consciousness to the world. Jane is an exceptional human being who serves as a mentor for me. She is a wonderful mother, a bright spirit, wise beyond her years, and I hope that you can really gain some pieces of gold from her interview. Please enjoy Jane.
My name's Jane Murray, and I am the founder and CEO of a company called Peace Beam, which is a digital publisher based in London, although we are a virtual team. We've always been a virtual team, even before the pandemic. So.
Wonderful. Some good news, some really exciting news for you. This week you are launching your new book. Would you share a little bit of information about your book with us?
Sure. So it's an audiobook which we produced for the London School of Economics and Political Science for their accelerator, LSE Generate. And we've had quite a long relationship with the LSE, and we were speaking to them last year about further material that we could produce for them. And one of the areas that we looked at that isn't properly addressed, I think, is that kind of intangible, unquantifiable part of becoming an entrepreneur, understanding motivations, understanding agendas, understanding, our own kind of shadow material, and how important that is in the path for any individual and for the companies that they create. And so that's being launched on the 4th of June within the LSE itself, and then we're looking at September for a more general release. It's called The Path of the Entrepreneur, Understanding Your Shadow.
That's great. We're gonna put a link to your book information to the bio and to Peace Beam at the end of the interview, so people can watch out for that if you want to know more about Jane or contact her, see what she's up to. So even if you don't watch the whole interview, make sure to catch the last slide so you can get all of her information. Wonderful, Jane. Could you talk about some bumps in the road or some pitfalls that new young entrepreneurs could look out for that you've had in your experience thus far?
Yeah, and I think, there are so many bumps along the road and so many pitfalls that I could speak about, but I think it's probably more helpful to talk about the overall theme. So they were all variations on a particular theme, and that actually is partly what inspired the book that I wrote. And I think the biggest pitfall that I encountered was not really being clear about my own motivations and my own agendas. And I think when I was certainly in my 20s and early 30s, that lack of clarity, that lack of self-knowledge was something that led me down paths that I think probably were less constructive than paths that I took when I had a better understanding of myself and my own motivations. So the one thing that I observe is that it's usually when people are 20, kind of 30 years into their careers that they engage with good coaching or therapy or any of those kind of, elements where we can start to uncover our own patterns. But actually, I think it's much more useful at the beginning of your career than kind of halfway through or towards the end of it. So I think that was the biggest pitfall that I encountered. And that played out in a number of different scenarios. But that was really fundamentally what was at its heart. I didn't really understand myself very well.
That makes sense. I think most people start that way. We're not really trained to understand the soft skills that are the most important, skills, so to speak. So,
Yeah.
what are a tip or a little shortcut, a little trick that you've used to sort of overcome these pitfalls that a young woman entrepreneur could potentially implement in her life as she's getting going to perhaps bypass some of the pitfalls? Or is there a short trick?
No, I don't think there is necessarily a short trick, because experience is its own teacher, obviously, and that's and all of our experiences are unique to us and kind of designed just by the nature of it, designed very specifically for things that we need to learn individually. But one thing that I think would have been incredibly valuable, and I can't really overstress the importance of this, is finding somebody who can speak to you with a degree of objectivity about your own skills, your own resources, your own abilities, and who can maybe give you that sort of room for you to have a degree of clarity about the path forward, particularly when you're coming to major decisions, or decisions that are going to have impacts on your professional life and on your personal life. Having an objective person that you can speak to, I think, is vital. And that doesn't have to be a coach or somebody professional. What you're looking for is somebody who really has your best interests at heart, and who knows you, or is a good mirror for you. I think that can short circuit a lot of disastrous or potentially disastrous decisions, I think.
How would you recommend that a young female entrepreneur go about that? About finding, if it's not somebody that they have in their very close network of friends or family, how would you recommend that they go about looking for somebody that could be objective, that could help them?
Well, I think, I think that is a difficulty, right? It's always the difficulty is, okay, well, how are we going to build our networks with people in a useful way? And when I was younger, I didn't really understand the value of asking people, for help or for a conversation. And I think when we're younger and we're starting out, we tend to think that might somehow disadvantage us if we acknowledge the fact that we could do with some advice. So I think it is about developing a sense of openness and asking people, and it might not be the first person that you ask, but they might know somebody who you could speak to. And then it's the question of building a relationship with somebody. And again, it doesn't have to be somebody who has very specialist knowledge. It might be it might be a member of your extended family, or it might be a member of your friendship group, somebody they know. So I always think I think it's very important to assume value everywhere. Start with that open-mindedness that, you're looking for somebody who can bring you value, and assume value everywhere. And eventually the right person will show up. And that might be several people over the course of your career. But being open to it, I think, is really important. Yeah.
That's really great advice. It's advice that has come about before in these interviews, So I hope that people that are watching this will take note of that. Just finding someone to help you, to coach you, to mentor you, to be an objective sounding board, whatever, but someone that is not necessarily so involved in your life that they cannot be objective, which is,
and I think it is hard. And one of the issues that I think we all face is that there are moments where our perception of reality isn't necessarily accurate. Like that occurs when there's a combination of extreme stress and self-doubt. And so it's so important to have the input of a noble friend, whatever form that takes, who's going to help you through those times. And my feeling is that certainly when I was starting out, which is really, a long time ago now, those networks and those ideas weren't as developed. Whereas I think now people are more receptive to the idea of mentorship and coaching and just the kind of general giving of advice when it's asked for. So I would take advantage of that opening that there is now.
Very, very good advice. Thank you. Could you tell us about one of your biggest challenges being a woman in business?
Gosh, there are a few things that I could speak to on that. I think one of the biggest challenges that I encountered, and again, I have to preface this by saying this is now, these sorts of challenges I encountered or were formed when I was starting out, which is, really in the 90s, where my idea of my own value and my own skills was not deeply rooted in what my own value and my own skills were. I felt that I had to mimic a projected idea of what power might look like or what authority might look like. And that left me with a brittle relationship to myself that I don't think was particularly helpful. I don't think there is a huge amount of really positive modeling for what different forms of power are, or for how we can connect to what is in our essence. And I think that for women can be, it can hold us back, because there is a sense we self-censor, because there is a sense that power coming through our essence isn't going to have the respect that it would come through if it was through a slightly different prism. So I think that's one of the things that was certainly problematic for me. I do think that is changing, though. I think our understanding of leadership is altering dramatically now. So I see, I'm very hopeful about that for women in business.
Yeah, great. Is there anything that you would have done differently if you could go back and do it again?
I think that's a tough question, because I think, you only have what you have at the time. And if I had done things differently, I wouldn't have learnt the lessons that I have learnt on my way through. I think if I could have alleviated some of the unnecessary anxiety and stress that I experienced in my 20s and 30s, that is the one thing that I would have done. If I could have developed the tools for understanding so much stress and anxiety is entirely unnecessary and entirely unproductive, I think that would have been helpful. It would have left me with a lot more energy for things that were constructive for me.
Yeah, reducing stress. It feels like that's the name of the game right now, isn't it? Just keeping it simple and reducing stress. We're spinning, feels like, into some crazy vortex, and we're just slowing down is the one thing that we could do for ourselves to help combat the stress.
The experience, the time that we're speaking now, having been through the lockdown, I think the visceral experience of actually an enforced slowing down for people has been very illuminating in terms of what's necessary and what isn't necessary in one's life.
Yeah, it's definitely going to change things, isn't it? Could you tell me about something that you are most proud of in your life or your career?
Well, I'm most proud of being a mother. Actually, that's that has been the greatest joy of my life, and the source of, all of my kind of desire and motivation. Now I have one son, and he's growing up quite fast. But for me in my life, and I've had five startups. I ran a VC fund for 20 years and a lawyer, and all of those accomplishments I'm proud of, and I'm glad that I did them, but nothing really replaces the value of our relationships in our life. And I think that's a really important thing for all of us to have front and center. That's what matters, really. And that's what I'm most proud of. It's being my son's mother.
That's amazing. I was just having a conversation the other day about really taking back the power of what it means to be a mother and to raise your own children. We've we've the pendulum has swung a bit for us as we try to become more empowered and make our own decisions, and sometimes at the expense of our families. So, just try to figure out what that means, and like what it means to be a good mother, and what it means to raise good humans in the world that will be, good people to this planet and to each other, which is something that, we're struggling with as a human race right now. So that's great. And I'm really glad that you said that. What has your experience taught you most about yourself? I'm sure it's hard to just pick one thing, but one thing that you can think about.
My goodness.
Loaded question.
What has it, my experience, I think what it has taught me most about myself is my capacity for my resilience. I think all of us we're all much stronger and much more resilient than we believe that we are. And I think all of my experiences kind of put together, that's what it has. I think that's the biggest thing that it has shown me. So no matter what life throws at us, it doesn't mean it isn't going to be painful or distressing or sometimes tragic, but my heart can cope with a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. So faith in that capacity, I think. Yeah.
That is so important. That is so important, because sometimes we are in the middle of, the deep, dark night of the souls, and we think we're there alone. And in reality, I think for me, and possibly for you and many other women, when you get out of that, you emerge so much stronger. And if you could only see yourself, post the hole, when you're in the hole, to say, this is just like strength school. So, you're going to be like incredible badass when you get out of this, like even more so every time. And maybe it would make things a little bit harder, easier for us to deal with.
Exactly. And, diamonds are formed under extreme pressure. So, it's really important to bear that in mind.
Definitely. So moving back to business a little bit more, what have you had any reoccurring themes that you've seen as a woman in business specifically, not just in the business world, but as a woman in business?
Well, I think my recurrent theme that I have seen is that there tends to be a blindness to agendas, particularly to the fact that often in organizations, whether they are kind of startups or developed companies, that people's agendas don't actually align. And that's what creates a lot of the difficulties that we have huge industries developed to cope with. And I think that blindness to motivation and agenda is something that certainly as we emerge from this post-pandemic world, that we need to get to grips with across particularly in businesses, because businesses of the future are going to need to have the values baked into their DNA in a way that is obvious to consumers, because there has been a mind shift in consumers and their relationship to businesses, and where there is transparency in terms of agendas and values within the companies themselves, because they're the ones that are going to be agile, resilient, and able to weather some of the storms that we will have to traverse over the next few years.
Yeah. Could you expand just a little bit on what you mean about sort of agendas? Like, what does that mean for you? Like, as far as...
Well, I think that... And obviously, I speak from the lens of startups, where companies that creative stage of companies. So I mean, I'm not really speaking to the larger corporates, but I feel that when you are creating a company, bringing something into the world that is going to have impact on the people who work there and the people who interact with that company, it is very important that you are absolutely clear about the purpose of that company. If it is purely profit, if it is purely social impact, or if it's an amalgamation of those two things, and that the individuals who are then the heart and mind of that company are absolutely aligned on that. Because where there isn't an alliance on that, you're going to create issues, and there's going to be faltering in progress that it's potentially very, very damaging. I mean, we have a really high rate of startup failure, and that's not something that we can continue to afford, because the impact on society of that is huge, and is going to increase, because entrepreneurship and beginning people starting their own businesses is going to be something that we see a huge amount of over the next few years, because a lot of sources of trade and business that people previously relied on aren't going to be around in the way that they were.
Definitely. Thank you for that. If you weren't doing what you are doing now, what would you be doing?
Well, it depends. It depends on when you speak to me. But at the moment, I think I have been through a process, over my life of intense simplification of my life. And that has taken on lots of different forms. And the latest iteration of that is now a complete fascination with how do we become in an ordinary life embedded in the natural world. So I think if I wasn't doing what I'm doing, I'd be a farmer. Maybe not a great one, Kat, but that's what I
I see Farmer Jane with your overalls, just like, cutting some lettuce. No,
yeah.
I mean, I'm out here in the countryside too right now, and growing a garden and loving every second of it. It's amazing. It is amazing. I mean, you hear that, but when you start putting your hands in the dirt,
And I think a lot of our systemic issues and societal issues are a direct result of our disconnection from the natural world and the miracle of actually, growth and life and cycles and all the rest of it. I think so much soul food can be drawn from that, and it's very simple and very accessible.
Yeah,
I'm not saying farming is, but growing food and growing things. Yeah.
I mean, even growing, if you're in an apartment, growing a flower in a flower pot and watching it develop, just starting there, I think is an easy way for people to transition, to just get that sense of what it feels like to have something alive and care for something.
Yeah, and interesting, actually, I've just started working on a new Peace Beam series, which will be much longer than the ones that we usually do, all around how, planting and a meditative practice around that. So, yeah.
Oof, I can't wait to hear it. Excited. If you had a tool, a resource that would have been helpful for you during your career path, what would it be?
When you say tool, Kat, what do you mean?
Just something like, whether it be a mentor or a book or if there was something that you could recommend maybe to your son, if you said to him, here's this, if I had had this when I was going through my career, it would have been really helpful. Something
right.
Like
that. Yeah, no, okay, well that's, for me, I think the most, because I'm very stuck in my head, as with a lot of people, particularly in business, you end up kind of in a very mental world, and the intellectual part of you is very on. And I think then it becomes very difficult to discern between what's real and not real, because we think all of our thoughts are real. And I think a practice that I developed, much later, it went well into my late 30s, I think, was to the practice of reflection and contemplation, and being able to understand that, our thoughts are almost like the kind of products of breathing. They're not everything that you think is real or needs to be acted upon. And I think, that would have been incredibly useful when I was younger. And I do try to teach that to my son. I mean, it's harder to get when you're young, but I think in your 20s, that would have been massively helpful to me.
That's a really good point. And I was actually just reading a book, and I wish I had the name of it because I can't remember it. But in the future, I did have to have my little book of the day. But it was just about that. It was about, don't believe your mind when you're going to bed at night in the morning. Just don't believe it. Like, don't act on it. Don't freak out, because it's just your head processing. It really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard to discern. It is a hard thing to discern because we want to believe that our thoughts are cohesive and clear and that we know what we're doing. And so it's a bit discerning to, it's jostling, I guess is the word, to think that your head is not making sense and you know, not to grab onto everything that's going in there. So really good advice. And, you know, there's got to be, I guess, like slowing down, meditating, contemplating, and understanding.
There are lots of methods that you can approach that, but really, really developing an objective relationship to thought is vital. I think, particularly in our ludicrously speeded up world where everything is fighting for our attention. You know, it's hard to get that space. So.
I hope I can have another interview with you just about that topic. I know you know what you're talking about, and I think we can really use some help. So one last question before I let you go about your day. What is your hope for the future?
Well, again, speaking from, you know, the lens that I have, which is around the startup world and entrepreneurship, my hope for the future is that it becomes normal that people who are engaged in business are also engaged with the self in a way that translates into the values in their company and the impact that their companies have, in a way that the possibility for us creating a world that works for everyone can become a reality. And I really do think that that is the possibility, but we need a cohort of realistic, clear-eyed, values-driven entrepreneurs to navigate that, the possibility of that path for us. I am hopeful that that is something that can emerge.
That's wonderful, Jane. I wanted to ask you one last thing. Could you just tell us just briefly about Peace Beam? Because we talked a little bit about your book, but we've mentioned your startup Peace Beam, but just so give people sort of an idea of what that is.
Yeah, so we are about 3 years old, and we produce guided meditations. And so our whole passion at Peace Beam is about kindness. And rather than kind of being in that sort of mental space of mindfulness, the idea of Peace Beam is that you evolve your mindfulness into kindfulness and your well-being into world-being. So we produce material that enables people to embody those practices. And we're unusual. Coming from a VC background, we took the decision about 18 months ago that we weren't going to take external funding and we were going to grow using multiple forms of capital. We experiment with kindness capital and all kinds of very disruptive ideas. And I have an amazing team of people who work with me. They're all women and scattered around the globe. They're all extraordinary. And and as well as that, we also produce some more sort of educational technical material for, as we've spoken about, the book that we're producing for the LSE. But at our heart, it's about producing heart-activating material for stressed and overwhelmed people.
And if you don't know what kindness capital is, I should highly recommend that you check out Peace Beam, because I've been playing with it a little bit and it's totally switches your head into a different space. It's actually quite impressive, and it's a new thing. You are quite cutting edge, and using kindness as capital is not something you hear a lot, but it's so impressive and amazing what you're doing. And I'm just thrilled that people got access to you today through us. So I thank you so much, Jane, for being here. I really was looking forward to talking to you. There's so much more we could talk about. I could go on forever. I hope that we get to have a follow-up with you for sure here in Women in Business series. And Jane's slide is on the last, her slide is coming up here. Again, check out Peace Beam, check out her new book, reach out to her if you want to know more. And that's it for today. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.